Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Multifamily Unplugged show, the number one Saturday morning radio show for the real estate investor, broker, and property management professional. How's everybody doing this morning? Glad you're
Morning.
here. Well, we're going to dive into raw, unscripted conversation about multifamily real estate, property management, and other current events that affect the business every day. Here's what we're not going to talk about today. We're not going to talk about politics, and we're not going to talk about the election because nobody knows anyhow. But I'm Mike Morawski, and I'm joined by my co-host, C. Gordon Moose, who we proudly call Moose. Carl, say hey, good morning.
Hey, how you doing, Mike and Michael? We got Mike and Michael today. How you guys doing?
It's going to be an awesome day. Everybody's going to walk away from here this morning wishing their name was Mike.
Mike and Mike in the morning.
Hey, good morning, Mike. Good to have you here. Well, we provide raw, unscripted conversation. It becomes very spontaneous what we talk about. And really, that's how the real estate business is. It becomes very spontaneous, where you have to think fast on your feet, right? So how do we get there? You know, if we're not engaged in conversation on a daily basis, it's tough to follow through. So what we want to try and do is see how we're engaged in this space. So that's just what we're going to provide you every week. My co-host and I, we're going to bring guests on. My co-host and I have over 50 years of experience and knowledge to give you. So we say, grab your coffee, sit back, and enjoy the ride. Here's some new banter for the upcoming year, Carl. Live a ridiculous life. So let me ask you a couple of questions around that. Do you understand what it would take for you to live in a ridiculous life? And how would you get there? You know, have you been thinking about what you're going to do next year? You know, 2020 is over. Are you just sitting back and riding out the rest of the year? Or have you started to set goals for 2021? You know, by starting today, you really give yourself an unfair advantage over everybody else because you're going to add 2 extra months to the year for yourself. So instead of 12 months next year, you're going to have 14 months. That's quite an unfair advantage. But our goal here is to help you change your thinking in the way that you think a little bit differently. So we want to encourage you to invest in your education, to invest in your future. And how do you get better? Well, this week's show is sponsored by the 90-Day Execution Challenge Program. That's the program that Carl and I rolled out at the Multifamily Global Summit a couple of weeks ago. And we still have space available in that program. We'll talk about it a little bit more to the end of the program today, but we want you to give some thought to it and thought to getting involved. Well, anyhow, this week we're joined by Mike Facchini. Mike is going to talk to us today about how to work through the loan process. Let me tell you a little bit about Mike, though. And let me call him Michael. I apologize for that. Sorry, Michael.
No.
But Michael started as a mortgage loan officer in early 2001. That was a perfect year to get in the real estate business, wasn't it?
Oh, it was great.
Yeah. Since then, Michael's closed hundreds of millions of dollars in loans for his clients, and he's invested in developed managed property all over the country. It's the wealth of mortgage and real estate investment knowledge that he brings to each transaction for his clients. There's no transaction that he feels is too small or too large that he can't assist you with, coach you through, and help you close. Whether it's a turnkey operation, whether it's a renovation, whether it's something you're going to flip or something you're going to hold. And we're going to get a lot of information and go deep with Michael this morning. And I'm going to turn this over to my co-host Moose right now because he is going to take us for a ride. Morning, Carl.
Hey guys, yeah, Mike, thanks for that. Thanks for that introduction, and Michael, thank you so much for spending this morning with us because you know, Mike Morawski and I know just how important it is to find the right mortgage professional to work with because, you know, 99, and I don't know the statistic, but I know every transaction I ever did had a mortgage attached to it. And, you know, the majority of deals out there do. So we really appreciate you being here and, you know, and addressing our audience. So welcome.
Thanks for having me, guys. This is great. Yeah, as we've talked, I have a passion for multi-units, for myself and my own investments and lending. And, the clients that I talk to, whether you're really fresh in the industry or fresh with building your portfolio or have been doing it for years, I really enjoy those conversations. And one thing that Mike said about spontaneity, I've never really put it that way, but I think you nailed it in the sense of every deal is so different. You got to think on your toes. You got to get creative. It's not cookie cutter like a lot of real estate deals. So yeah, it's great to be here. I'm excited to talk about it.
Yeah, and I used to be a banker. I used to work for WAMU. I used to work for LaSalle Bank, and I was also a broker. And I just want to make that distinction for our audience. When you're looking for a mortgage, when you walk into Chase or you walk into Fifth Third or a bank, the individual you're going to talk to can only talk to you about those programs that bank has or those mortgage offerings that bank has. The advantage that I always saw when I was investing in real estate to working with a broker was that the broker can look at your deal and then go out to the marketplace and find the best money, the best mortgage program for your specific deal. So, Mike, I just want to talk a little bit about that from your perspective, because I think it's so much more valuable to work with, an individual like yourself that's not locked into one corporate program, one bank's program.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be for programs as well as rates to make sure you're not only getting the best program to fit you and allow you to get the property, but also with the best terms. And so in this world, you have banks, like you said, are called correspondent lenders, which is really what we do most, and then brokers. And we also broker. So we have dozens of wholesale channels we can go to. Like, I think the easiest analogy would be an insurance agent, right? They're dealing with all these different carriers and they can place that policy with different carriers. And so that's what a broker would do. We have dozens of options for that. Really allows us to get outside the box sometimes, like you said, Carl. So then you got banks on the totally opposite side of that. And as you pointed out, the bank's going to do what they do that day. They offer what they offer in terms of rate and program, and it's usually a pretty narrow lane. So if you fit perfectly in there, great. And if you don't, like a lot of people, you're going to be limited. And then in the middle there is what's called the correspondent lender. So what we do is we can use our own money and we can go securitize it with big government agencies that back the mortgage industry at large. So that can be very effective and very cost efficient. And we're making the decisions as a lender. But we have a variety of channels to go to, as Carl was pointing out. And that's important. And if we're not fitting in those channels with our own money, we can go use other people's money, so to speak, on the wholesale market and find a bunch of different channels. So it's really the best of all worlds. And for me personally, the only way I'd want to operate as a lender, and even as an investor, is to have all those options.
Right. That's good. And the other thing is that, Mike, when Mike, I give Mike credit, Mike Morawski credit for putting most of the speakers together for the multifamily global summit that we did. And we really wanted to focus, and you were one of the sponsors for that, which we really appreciate, but we really wanted to focus on practitioners, not just people out there that are, that are talking about doing this stuff, but also people that are practicing what they're preaching. And I think it's very valuable for the listeners to understand that, if you're looking for a mortgage professional, Michael is your man. And Michael is also in the trenches. He's also an investor. And that's very important because I think there's a lot of people out there that are hawking their programs or telling you, what to do, but they're not really in the trenches. So I think that's very valuable. And then the other thing is, let's talk a little bit about the new person. And by the way, I apologize. There's something going on with my computer. I can't get my video going, so you just see my picture. But anyway, let's talk about the person, Michael, that hasn't bought a piece of property. Maybe he's found a 3 flat or 4 flat. What's the best way to approach that? Because a lot of our listeners are new to the real estate game.
Yeah. So I think there's a distinction between owner occupied and investment. And when you're dealing with a 3 or 4 unit, everyone's going to consider that an investment because it is. It's a good investment for you. And but in the term of financing, what it means is investment to us means non-owner occupied. You're not living there. And then owner occupied or primary residence, there's a lot of people out there doing what's called house hacking, which is a term that's been created. Just a, fancy term for living there, renting out a few units and reducing your costs, right? So we could live in a condo and pay our $2,000 a month in taxes and association dues and mortgage, or we can have a 2 or 3 bedroom apartment in a building that we own and rent out 2 or 3 more units in that building. And those rents are paying for a good deal or all of our mortgage and taxes and insurance. So that primary residence is called a house hack. When you live there, the interest rate is going to be a little lower than if you don't live there. Think about it that way, where if you're lending money to a friend, would you rather give it to someone who's actually has that roof over their head? It means a little more to them, right? They're going to do everything in their power to make sure that place is taken care of and the mortgage is paid on time because it's the roof over their head. Investor loans or investment properties are treated a little different, slightly higher interest rate, no big deal. The bigger thing is down payment. So down payment on a multi-unit is going to be 25% down on your standard residential conventional program. So your really good interest rate programs that are straightforward, 30-year fixed, great terms, 25% down. So, there are programs that allowed less, and that was probably something we would have talked about in March. But as COVID hit, the industry backs off and they get much more conservative. We as an industry and the capital behind us get much more conservative. And so those programs where we could do 15% or 20% down as an investor, not living there, are not here right now. And they probably won't be for a couple of years. So what we're dealing with at the moment is 25% down. Or if I live there, we can look at as little as 3.5% down.
Wow.
So Carl, you had mentioned for those starting out, I might own a condo right now, or I might not own anything. And I'm thinking about this multi-unit game and just want to get my foot in the door. Great way to do that is, well, maybe I'm going to sell my condo, or maybe I rent my condo out and I go live, I become a property manager on site, which is a great crash course. Learn a ton about being a landlord, all those politics. Learn about construction to a degree, right? Where, something happens from a plumbing perspective, you get the plumber over there, you're on site with them, you're seeing what's going on, you're just learning. And so a lot of my clients that have gone this route and bought their first place, lived there for a few years, then they go on to buy their second place, that crash course has really taught them a lot. So I would say that's one of the easier ways to get in. But then there's, buyers or borrowers that own a couple places and they're living in a house and comfortable with their family, and they just want to buy these as investments. By all means, we can do that with 25% down. You have opportunities to do that with a rehab loan too. So you might find some buildings where it needs a little love. Doesn't necessarily need to be a gut rehab. Sometimes it's some lipstick, with 15, 20 grand a unit, 10 grand. So to work that in and find a value or an opportunity to upgrade and increase value and increase rents.
Yeah, really, Mike Morawski, I'm going to give you a chance here to jump in too, because I don't want you to just sit on the sidelines. But Michael, you brought up some really great points that we've talked about before. For the first time buyer, there's options. If you own that condo, as you said, and you want to get in and you want to get a good deal on a mortgage, you can rent the condo out and become buy a 2 or 3 flat and live in the unit and get a great rate. Right. And I'm a big promoter of that, for somebody that's just getting started. I bought the first building I bought was an 18-unit building. I had no business buying that building. I made so many mistakes. I would have been much better off buying a 3 flat, just exactly what you just said. Buy a 3 flat, owner occupied, live in the basement or live on this 3rd floor, rent it out. I'd learn about, becoming a landlord. I'd learn about becoming a contractor. I'd learn about, all the laws that go into renting real estate. Yep. That education alone would have been worth it. And that is a great way, when people come to me and say, gosh, I want to get into real estate, what should I do? I tell them exactly what you just said. You know,
great.
go buy a 3 flat, you know, have somebody else pay your mortgage, pay your insurance, pay your taxes, get the tax benefits, get the education of owning the property. And in 3 years or 2 years, you can leverage out, or you can buy another one if you want to decide to. If not, or you can just keep that property. So that is excellent advice that you just gave. Mike, do you have anything for Michael?
Yeah, let me jump in here real quick. First of all, I just want to say, if anybody has any questions, go to the chat, put them in the chat. We'll get those questions answered for you. But feel free to put any information in there or ask any question that you need. And the one thing that I forgot to mention early on was, hey, don't forget about us. Go out and go to the social media platforms and like us and subscribe to our social media platforms so that we know that, you know, you guys are hanging around and we're able to, you know, because we're always putting good content out and good information. So make sure you're subscribed to that. Hey, you know, Carl, you mentioned mistakes, and I don't ever feel that a mistake is bad. It's like, you know, nobody can ever ask a dumb question. So don't, you know, a lot of times people don't ask questions because they think they're going to be dumb. And I tell people, hey, ask the question, because you don't know unless you ask. It's the same thing with the mistake. We've all made mistakes in our lives, big ones, small ones, and we can learn from them. It's not about the mistake. It's about the recovery from the mistake, right? Are you resilient enough? So, hey, listen, you buy, you know, I bought that first 11 unit deal I bought, and I didn't do any due diligence, right? I took the owner's word for everything. That was a huge mistake. I didn't follow through and say, and look at the leases and look at the financials. I just kind of took the word of the owner. And boy, did I have a lesson to learn after I closed and found out that it wasn't exactly what he said, right? So I bought a bill of goods, is what I like to call it. And but you know, it quickly became a don't wanter. But Mike, what do you say about that kind of stuff where you don't do the due diligence, and how important is not only the due diligence after you go to contract, but that preliminary trap evaluation, so that you know exactly what you're buying. Can you talk to that? And
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily even mean the underwriting process from your end. I just mean the evaluation piece. So
Yeah, right. No, I agree. I mean, the best mistakes, or the best lessons I've learned have been from mistakes. And you just kind of got to get out there. You get some bumps and bruises, but the best thing you do is surround yourself with people who know what they're doing. And there are people who will pretend they know what they're doing, real estate agents and, you know, and lenders and whatnot who dabble in multi-units. And you don't want people who dabble. You want people that have done it themselves, that are doing multiple transactions per month in this space, and it's their niche. It's what they really do. So if you find that agent, you find that lender, and then there's the home inspector, of course, too. And I always tell my clients, like, if there's a home inspector that charges $100 less, don't go with them. Go with the guy that's more expensive, that seems like he's really thorough. Because when you're spending $400, $500, $600, $800, $1 million, whatever it is, that extra $100 is totally worth it. And you go there during the home inspection, you walk the property with them for a few hours. They're pointing things out. People are always waiting for the report. I'm not that interested in the report. As a buyer, I'm more interested really getting to know this inspector and connecting with them. And then they're invested. They like me, right? There's something going on the site, and they're, oh, okay, this guy actually cares. All right, let me show you something. These guys geek out on it. They want to tell you more, right? And now you're really learning. And so that process of discovery and education is really important on your first several transactions. And you have these professionals that, if you find the right ones, they're going to pour into you. So, you know, don't rush into it. Spend some time teeing it up, get comfortable with the market and the sub-market, what you're looking for. And as you start to nail down on properties and what your requirements are, what you're looking for, your business plan, you got to pull in those professionals to really gain their knowledge, because they've made a lot of mistakes, and you can learn, you can gain from their mistakes, right? So I think that's the most important. Surround yourself with professionals that do this.
the one thing I always say is success leaves clues, right? And if we follow successful people, we're going to ultimately have a better chance of being successful. I don't always believe that history repeats itself or that you're going to do what history does, but you give yourself a better chance because that success does leave clues.
Yep.
And I liked what you said. Hey, don't quiver over $100 on the home inspection. And I used to tell when I was selling residential real estate, that's what I used to tell the buyer. Don't bicker over 1/4% or 0.5%. You're talking about $8 a month. Does it really matter in the big scheme of things? So it's more about the service. It's more about the terms. It's more about what you're developing. And I think the thing, I don't know, maybe as I get older, I realize that it's about relationship. And you kind of
Yeah.
alluded to that with the home inspector, is it's about building that relationship with that guy, because you're going to get.
And I'd say that goes for attorneys and contractors too,
Yeah.
right? You can just tell certain contractors that are just trying to get the business, they're going to tell you what you want to hear. They're not thinking about all the little surprises around the corner. And then the other guy you talk to who's very professional, he's more expensive, but maybe he's not more expensive. Maybe he's actually cheaper because he's going to get the job done right with less mistakes on time. He's going to tell you what you need to know instead of surprises. And I've just learned that lesson so many times. Attorneys, same thing. I have clients that will get attorneys that are $150 cheaper. These attorneys are not paid anything. On these transactions, they're usually paid $650, something like that, $700 for the whole transaction. So they're doing a few hours worth of work at least. They're getting paid $100, $200 an hour, which is cheap for a Chicagoland attorney or most, sizable city. And the guys that are getting $500 aren't doing anything. And as a lender, I feel it, the client feels it. So these are just small examples of the relationships and the professionals and people. You get what you pay for, right? That old saying. And that I think is a huge lesson in this, whether you're buying your first, second place or your 10th place.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And, Mike Morawski and I are big believers in building your team, and one of the things I want to tell, excuse me, one of the things I want to express to our listeners, if you don't have a team, a great place to start, like the first player, the franchise player that you want to develop a relationship is the mortgage guy, a guy like Michael, because Michael knows everybody. He knows the inspectors. He knows the good attorneys. He knows the title guy. He knows the good real estate broker, because that's who he deals with. As the lender, he's kind of the hub of the wheel, and all these other service providers are the spokes, right? So, if you're just getting started, developing a relationship with Michael is a phenomenal thing to do, because he's going to bring in his gravitas. He's going to bring in his network, as you move through your investing and your multifamily business, right? And Michael, let me ask you this. I know the answer to this question. When is it? When do you like to be brought in with a buyer? When do you like to be brought in? Is it ever too early to bring you in?
Yeah, that's a great question. People will call me and say, they feel silly calling me, or, shy or embarrassed to call me because they're like, well, I'm probably not buying for a year or two. Am I wasting your time? And I say, no, absolutely not. Because at each stage of this process, for any buyer, some are going to take longer, some are going to be quicker. At each stage of that process, there's a conversation to be had to prepare them for where they're going. And they'll tell me, here are my circumstances. This is what I'm looking to do. This is what I'm working with. This is what I'm striving for with these savings. And I'm shoring this up. I'm doing this and that. And each situation, I'm going to say, okay, this makes sense. And, I'll talk to people where you might be ready in 3 or 4 months, or you might be ready in a year and a half. And those conversations are different. They will go, I always, say we start at the 30,000 foot view, and how quickly we go to 10,000, and then, the ground floor just depends on where you're at. But I think starting out earlier on helps for a couple reasons. One, we can plot out a map, right? So it's a lot easier to go to some small town in Kentucky if we're using Google Maps. If we're not, and we're winging it, we're probably going to take a while to get there, make some mistakes, maybe run out of gas. So, if we can talk about it and help you plot it out, like these are the things you want to think about. And we don't necessarily have to go into the weeds. We could start with high level stuff. So it helps in that respect. And then I think the second part is people leave that realizing with some confidence that, okay, wait, I can do this. It's not as scary as I thought. I'm not going to say that this is an easy thing. I mean, you've got to stay committed to the process. You've got to grow into the process and evolve through this transaction. But knowing some of the stuff earlier on, I think gives people confidence and inspires them. And then they actually perform because they're like, okay, I can do this. And that's something I think a lot of people need to hear when we mean it, right? I'm not going to tell you you can do it if you can't do it. And I'm not going to tell you to go buy $1 million place when you should be buying a $500,000 place. But once you know what you can do, it changes the whole trajectory.
So one of the things I'd say, and you kind of alluded to it, but I think people get held back because of fear of the unknown, fear of rejection, fear of not being able to really have or really accomplish what they think they want to try and accomplish. And until they get the education, so they call you early, they call a broker early, they build that team, they know who their inspector is going to be, they know who their insurance people are going to be. Until they start to put those ducks in a row and take those steps and physically get out there and look at property and start doing the things that puts them in that buying transition, they stay stuck, right? And I think that we get held back by fear, but the knowledge helps us overcome that fear. So, and you kind of alluded to that. That was good.
Yeah, I think it's like anything in life that you want or you realize you need, but it's something big that's going to take effort and it can feel overwhelming. And, we can kick the can down the road, but it starts with one call, whether it's to me or, someone else that's a key player in the transaction, just to understand how it works. And a 30-minute, 45-minute conversation of understanding how it can work can change everything for you. Makes it a lot less intimidating.
We also have a question in the comment box here about, can you give an example for a multifamily purchase where you can show the rental income from the bank statements to purchase additional properties? So I'm not sure, and if they're asking, if you already own property, can you use that income? And why don't you answer it on both sides? So if I already own property, can I use the income to buy the new property? If I'm buying a multi-unit, can I use the income from the multi-unit I'm buying to buy that property? Can you answer that both ways?
So I think there's a couple questions in there. First off would be bank statement programs, if we're alluding to bank statement programs. So in lending, namely residential lending. So let's differentiate a couple things. So residential lending would be 1 to 4 units. Commercial lending would be 5 or more units. If you're looking to just start your investment portfolio or buy your first multi-unit, whether you're going to live there or not, you're probably looking at 1 to 4 units, especially in this climate, in this economy with COVID and whatnot. The money's a little easier and cheaper and moving more freely on the 1 to 4 units, especially for newer investors. So let's talk about residential. So bank statement programs are those which don't rely on a borrower's employment and income. It's more so, I might have various sources of income. I'm self-employed. I can't really document things as well with my tax returns, as a lot of self-employed borrowers, struggle with, because on paper they look a little different than maybe what's really happening in reality. And so that's captured more in bank statements. So those bank statement programs do exist. They are not as available right now. When COVID hit, a lot of this creative outside the box type of financing either went away or really restricted. But there are some programs like that where we're focusing more on either the borrower's inflows and outflows in their checking account or on the property's cash flow. So another type of program is a cash flow program, which I might only make, $500 a month at my job, which is not going to allow me to get approved for a loan. But I'm looking at a property that's bringing substantial income in, and it more than covers the debt service. And what debt service means in the residential world, it's a little simpler than the commercial world. It's this, it's on a 2, 3, 4 unit, it's what's the mortgage payment, principal and interest, what are the taxes, the real estate taxes, and what's the homeowner's insurance or the building's property insurance. And so does it cover that and then some? Is, you know, there's plenty of cushion. And so those are called cash flow programs. So that might have been one question. The other question would be, well, if I own a building and I've got rents coming in, can I use those rents to help me qualify for another purchase? And the answer is yes, pretty much, generally speaking. So the rents from building number one are offsetting the PITI, principal, interest, taxes, insurance, the mortgage, taxes, and insurance. You're going to hear PITI a lot. So it's a fancy word for my housing payment, the debt service. These are all synonymous. So if that rent is covering that, it's kind of like you can think of that's a wash. So now this building, that's a wash over there. Or if it's producing positive net rental income, then some of that extra income can flow into another bucket of my income. So at work, I'm making $1,000 a month, and then I've got, you know, let's say another $1,000 coming from net rental income above and beyond my debt service, my mortgage payment that I have to make. Then that can be counted as my total income to help me go qualify for the next building. Did I answer that, Mike?
Yeah.
Maybe that was more than what we wanted, but.
That's okay. You know what? More is always better sometimes in this case. And listen, I just want everybody to know, someone had asked, could we put Michael's contact information, and I put his contact information in the chat box there for you. I have another question here. Let's see. Can you give this? Okay, we gave the contact information. Is there a certificate that you look for, the inspector or due diligence, or is that necessary? So is there any type of an inspection certificate is what the listener is asking, Mike?
So they have to be a licensed inspector. Maybe that was part of the question. You know, and a license is part of it. But again, there's a lot of people that are licensed out there to do a lot of things. Just go with good recommendations of people that know what they're talking about and have worked with these inspectors before and can vouch for them. So I think that's as or more important as a certificate or license. When you finish the inspection, you will get a report from the inspector that details everything that was talked about. But that color commentary you get on site with the inspector as they're going through and pointing things out, that's gonna be way more valuable than the 2 or 3 sentence per line item on the report itself.
Right.
You know, Michael, you bring up a great point. We had, I used to have an inspector. Unfortunately, he and his wife retired. They're not active anymore. And I couldn't agree with you more, because I think it was about $600, and he would go through and I would walk through with him. And I swear to God, that guy, now people listening, you have to remember, the inspector comes in when you after contract. So you go to contract, and then you have your contingency periods where you have an inspection contingency. In other words, you have several weeks or a month or whatever you write into the contract where you have an opportunity to walk the property and inspect the property, and you can have a professional come with you. Well, during that time, this guy pointed out so many things that I was able to go back and renegotiate the contract, because he saw things that I would not see that would cost me money moving forward. And I was able to go back based on walking the property with this inspector and the report that they would give us. And I would go back and be able to get credits from the seller for things like the roof or electrical or plumbing that needed to be done that I would have never known about until it reared its ugly head and bit me in the rear end. So yeah, absolutely. That piece of advice is very good for our listeners, you know, and you know, that's just a really good point. The other thing I want to ask you is, you know, the stack, right? The loan stack. You and I know what that is. It's the documentation that you need to go and secure a loan. But what are the 4 or 5 share with our listeners what are the 4 or 5 most important things from a personal standpoint that they're required to provide to you to go out and get a loan. What are some of those things?
Always has been, and especially right now, we'll start with employment and income. That's a big piece of it. So in this COVID world, lenders and underwriters are simply the people that are reviewing the file and saying, yes, this meets guidelines, you're approved, or, this might not fit. And so what we're looking at is not just that what you've been making, what money that you make, gross income, but your line of work too is even being looked at too. So what stability might exist in that line of work? A lot of my friends and clients are airline pilots, right? And so right now, that's not the greatest situation. They're very well paid in a normal world, but right now, not so much. And so those things, there's a bit of discretion put there. But we're mainly looking at income, and there's different types of income. There's income that's fixed. So you might work a salary position and make, $60,000 a year, and you've been at this company for 3 years, and all right, that's pretty straightforward. You make 60,000, you're probably going to be with this company in the future. And as a lender, we're going to look at it that way. It's clean, simple.
Let me ask this though. I don't mean to interrupt you, but maybe I do, because here's what I want to know. Who makes that determination? Who says, hey, you know what? We don't think that the airline pilot's job is going to be stable in 6 months from now. How can somebody predict that or make that determination? I mean, it'd be the same thing, Mike, if they said, oh, the real estate market is going to get really bad, so the realtor and the lender is going to be without work. We can't give them loans anymore.
Well, if you really wanted to get into it, underwriters can act as private investigators, right? So let's use the pilot example. Let's say we hear from the Associated Press that United Airlines is going to be furloughing a bunch of people December 1st. They could look at that and say, okay, well, where's our guy going to sit in that, in those layoffs, so to speak, right? And what's happening now is we do what's called verification of employment. So normally in a normal world, we do one verification of employment. That's us calling your employer and saying, hey, does Carl work here? Yes, he does. Do you expect him to continue to work there? Yes, we do. Great, thank you. And then we're done. Well, now that's happening during underwriting and at the day of closing. So literally, we're making sure the day that you go to sign papers and we fund this transaction, when I say we, I mean lending industry at large, that you're employed. And so those fixed income salary situations are pretty straightforward, but then you have people that might work a great deal of their income is commission, or they're self-employed. So self-employed person, let's say, even independent contractors, you might be a real estate agent, Mike mentioned. A lot of real estate agents are 1099, as it's called, which means they're employed by a brokerage, but they're really an independent contractor, and they're commissioned. So it goes up and down every month. And so we're going to look at what they did in 2018 and 2019. We want a 2-year average. And then we're going to look at their year to date too. And they're going to show us what they're doing up until the point that we're giving them a loan. Is it staying consistent, or is COVID messing with it, right? So we might be, some of my clients were hairstylists. And for a couple months there, they couldn't work, right? And then it opened up and people were ready to get their hair cut, and it was gangbusters for a couple months after opening. So, so there's income and employment. That's a big piece. And then everyone's going to guess here, credit, right? What is our credit score? Credit typically above 620 is what lenders want to see. The higher, the better, right? So 680 would be great, over 700, over 720, over 740. The higher you go, those tiers, the better it gets. Maybe that plays into your interest rate a little bit. So credit score, and then trade lines, which means what kind of accounts do I have? Do I have credit cards? Do I have student loans? Do I have an auto loan, an auto lease? Have I been paying those on time? Do I have enough trade lines? Sometimes people think, well, I don't have any debt. I don't have anything. Some people don't even have a credit card. That might not be good. Your credit score actually might be low because we just don't have any point of reference, right? So it'd be good for you if you don't have a credit card, go out and get one. You might only get a $500 credit limit. Go and use it when you go buy $100 worth of groceries and then pay it off. You don't get charged interest on it if you pay it off, and it builds credit history. And over 6 months, you can actually increase your credit scores substantially by just showing some credit history.
Yeah. Yeah. What's funny is I had a client one time that had a 740 or a 750 credit score and couldn't get any credit. And we look, so we talked to a banker, and the banker said, "Oh, that's because you don't have any activity. You haven't had credit activity for a couple of years." So he had to get a secured credit card and took a secured loan with the bank. And over a year, that credit score opened wide up for him and was able to buy a house or buy a building actually, and do some other things. So it's interesting how that whole, how the FICO thing and all that works. And, that whole process, you have to pay attention to it. One of the things that I talk to people a lot about in my coaching is carry a personal financial statement with you. Know what you're buying, and does it go on the asset column or does it go on the liability column? Because, at the end of the day, we really want our asset column to be higher than our liability column. And a lot of people don't have any idea. They don't know. So until they sit down and actually write out everything that they own and everything that they owe, they have no idea what their net worth is. So I encourage people, hey, do a personal financial statement and carry it with you. And then every time you make a purchase, you're going to go buy a new car. Take a look at what's it going to do to your personal financial. Where does it add? Asset or liability? Because if it's going to add to your liability side, it might not make sense. And I always tell people, don't buy a car till you own some real estate. So I think that it's the perspective that we help our clients, it goes back to building the relationship, right? It's the perspective that we help our clients really take a look at what's going to help them be successful.
Mike, that's a great point, because I remember when I was a loan officer, and Michael, I'm sure you can appreciate this too. When a client came in and they had their act together, in other words, they had a personal financial statement, they had their net worth, they had, they had their act together. Not only did it make my job easier, but it also, I treated them psychologically, I treated them differently because they were being professional. And they came in and they were ready to go, right? And so my point is to what you guys are talking about is, if you're new at the game, get ahead of the curve. If you want to establish credit, do some research online and figure out a way to establish credit so that when you walk into Michael's office to get a loan, you don't have to go through that process. What Michael Morawski just said, go online and get a personal financial statement and fill it out. It's a good practice for you. And certainly when you walk into Michael's office to get a loan and you have a personal financial statement, he's just going to treat you more professionally because you're coming in as a professional. So I think, that's excellent advice. And it also goes back to what you said, Michael. It's never really too early to pick up the phone and have a call with you because, I would assume that you're going to put them on a path. You're going to say, hey, listen, this is what I suggest you do. If you're not going to buy a property for 6 months, here's what you should do for the next 6 months. Am I correct in that assumption?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think you bring up a great point about getting your ducks in a row, just getting organized. And I think that's going to get you set up for success and motivated. And also when it comes to my side of the table, I can look at it and help us plot things out more efficiently. So it's a great point. It's a great point. So you mentioned something about assets, which is the next piece of the puzzle. Obviously, you need some money for down payment, right? So checking, savings, do we have retirement accounts? If we're buying a primary residence, something people don't realize is buying a 3-unit or a 2-unit primary residence, you can use your 401k, give yourself a loan, so to speak. So you're not liquidating it. You're not getting taxed or penalized for early withdrawal. You're taking that 401k and a piece of it for down payment. So that could be an asset that you use actually for down payment. But at the very least, a retirement account and many other accounts that you're not using for down payment act as reserves, rainy day funds, which is very important. Our industry wants to see that you have something to fall back on. So if you need, let's say, $40,000 for the transaction, and you have $42,000 to your name, you have $2,000 left over when the dust settles from closing. For you personally and as a lender, we want you to build that bank up a little bit just so you have something to fall back on, especially with a multi-unit. Because you're going to have a microwave that breaks or a pipe that leaks or something's going to happen, and you just want to have a little extra money. Now, all that work that we need to do over time to these units to maintain them, it's totally justified by this investment and the earnings we can make. That's just part of the deal. So we shouldn't be scared by the fact that we have to replace a microwave at some point, or there's going to be a little plumbing leak that we got to call a plumber in for. It's just part of it. But we should have a rainy day fund just in case to cover that. As we build up capital reserves through owning the place throughout the years, you're eventually going to build up some capital reserves. But at closing, we need to see that you've got a little something extra. So those are the key pieces: is income, employment, credit, what trade lines you have, assets, reserves. And then the last piece is going to be the property itself. We're going to, of course, look at that. And that's important for you as a buyer. It's important for us because that property is the collateral. When we give you a loan, we're basing that loan on you as a borrower, and your strength, your ability to repay that loan is very important to us. And that's factored by your income and credit and assets. But the property and the strength of that property plays a big role as well.
Yeah. So Michael, you lend all over the country, is that correct, or just in the Illinois? Or
so on the residential side, you have to be licensed by state. And I am licensed all over the Midwest, California, Arizona, Colorado, Florida.
Okay. So I know we're getting towards the end of the program. I want to introduce you to Mike Morawski and my friend Dan Barrero. I think you'd be an excellent guest on his program as well. So remind me to do that offline. But I want to talk really quickly about exit strategy, because I know Mike Morawski's just written a book about that, and he's a big proponent about that exit strategy. We've been talking a lot about getting into a property, but I just want to talk just real quickly about exit strategy and refinancing, because that's probably a good part of your business as well. And by the way, if you haven't gotten Mike's book, people, go out and get Mike's book. It's great. It talks about exit planning.
Thanks, Carl. Yeah, exit plan, everything you needed to know about multifamily investing and why you need an exit plan before you buy. It's kind of been a labor of love. I've worked on it for the last couple of years, and I have a newfound respect for the authors in the world today, because it just takes a little bit more than I ever thought about to write a book and get it published and get it out there between all the hoops you jump through. So, but it's been a great process. So yeah, you can go to my website at mycoreintentions.com and buy that. Just on the front page, just log on to the tab on the book. So, Carl, we're coming to the end here. And here's what I want to say is that if anybody's looking to buy a property or looking for a mortgage, call Michael. Michael can definitely help you with a mortgage. And Mike's with Fairway Mortgage in Chicago, right, Mike?
We're all over the country, so we have offices in every state. My operation personally is in Chicago, and then I operate throughout the Midwest, Florida, Arizona, Colorado, California.
Perfect, good. And I put your contact information in the chat box, but why don't you tell people real quick how they can get a hold of you?
Yeah, so my website is a great place to find me, as well as my email. If you wanted to put a call together, I'd recommend drop me an email. We'll schedule time. So email is mike@team, and then my last name that you might see there in the bottom left corner. So mike@team, F as in Frank, ACCHINI.com. And then my website is Michael J as in Joseph and my last name. MICHAELJFACCHINI.com.
Great. And if anybody needs a broker referral or some other type of referral, whether it's locally in the Chicago market, whether it's nationally, we have a very large network. And we just had 20 speakers from around the country on our call or on our multifamily global summit a couple of weeks ago. So we have a very large national network. Give me a call, send me a direct email. We'll be able to help you and find somebody that'll best suit your needs, you know, kind of be a match for you. So I want to thank you for being here today. I want to thank all the callers and listeners for calling in and being here today. Carl, it is always a pleasure on Saturday morning to get you up after your late night Friday night being out.
Thanks, Mike.
And Michael, hey, a pleasure. Thanks for being here today. And we will look forward to talking to everybody next Saturday. Have a great weekend, everybody.
Thanks,
Nice
guys.
to be here. Have a great weekend.